Yeah. I'm actually currently out of the office. So this is just the AI version of me. So, okay, you gotta move. You gotta move. Okay. So this was not a request, but it popped up in my feed, and it was very interesting, and it's from Timeline, which has been pretty good. But this is Britain's Chernobyl, the nuclear disaster you've never heard of. Very true. So, I'm going to break this one down 17 minutes. 16. Oh, 16 minutes. Yeah, 16 and change. And we'll just go with it. It'll be a three-parter. So, let's go. Sorry, there's a fan going.
It was Colonel Paul Tibbets who took war forward into the nuclear age when he dropped a single atomic bomb, known as Little Boy, on the Japanese city of Hiroshima on August the 6th, 1945, from a B-29 bomber called the Enola Gay. 130,000 people were killed, and of the city's 76,000 buildings, all but 6,000 were destroyed. 3 days later, a second device was exploded over Nagasaki, and Japan surrendered.
The use of the bomb to destroy Hiroshima and Nagasaki was the most powerful imaginable demonstration of the destructive force of the bomb.
The terrible capability of nuclear weapons had been shown for the first time, and there began a scramble by the world's most powerful nations to develop their own bomb. One of those was Britain, and a secret...
Isn't it weird that we look at a weapon, and we're like, damn, do you see how much destruction that did? How many people that killed? How many buildings that destroyed? We got to get one of those. Several of them, just in case. It's amazing. If it exploded and cured cancer and released butterflies that would just, help repopulate bees and all kinds of stuff, people would be like, yeah. What about that one that wipes out miles of land and kills a bunch of people? Let's build some of those. We're just terrible people.
Windscale, a remote spot on the northwest coast of England, to manufacture plutonium, the man-made element which gives atomic weapons their terrifying power. But the British reactors, designed and built for the purpose, had one major flaw, and within 7 years of the start of production, would become the site of the world's first nuclear accident.
Wow.
Windscale was an accident that was waiting to happen.
It was here, at Los Alamos, in the New Mexico desert, that the Manhattan Project, the wartime work to build a nuclear weapon, was carried out in utmost secrecy. It was led by Major General Leslie Groves, a US Army engineer. The chief scientist was J. Robert Oppenheimer. The idea that nuclear fission could be used in the creation of the most powerful weapon the world had seen was first put forward in the late 30s. In Britain, the Maud Committee was set up to investigate the possibilities and reported in 1941. But it was the United States which undertook to build the first atomic bomb, a task it completed in less than 3 years. That it was able to achieve its aims in such a short space of time was a testament to the country's determination, scientific abilities, and industrial muscle. 3 new towns were built. Los Alamos was where the scientific team was based and where testing was carried out, while production of fissile material took place at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and at Hanford in the Pacific Northwest. The Hanford reactors were designed around a graphite core cooled by water drawn from the Columbia River. Such was the concern over the potential for a nuclear accident that a 25-mile...
Sorry. I blocked it though, no sound. Yeah. Walden University. There's no nuclear disasters there. I hope. I don't know. Okay, well, thanks T-Mobile or Xfinity, whatever you were.
that a 25-mile, 4-lane highway was built to allow the swift evacuation of workers. Scientists knew that if the water supply failed, it would be impossible to shut down the reactors before a nuclear explosion. But the pressure to manufacture plutonium was so high that the risk was judged to be acceptable.
If you love history, then you'll love History Hit. Our extensive library of documentary features everything from the ancient origins of our earliest ancestors to the daring mission to sink the Bismarck. History Hit has hundreds of exclusive documentaries with unrivaled...
It's way too
Alamos
far.
in the spring of 19...
Sorry, I went way too far.
1,200 people lived within its 625 square miles. Construction was a massive undertaking, but the speed of progress allowed the first fissile material from Hanford to be delivered to Los Alamos in the spring of 1945. It was eagerly awaited by the scientists, and preparations were made for the world's first nuclear explosion, codenamed Trinity. The device was raised to the top of a 110-foot-high metal tower and tested in the early hours of July the 16th, 1945. To the delight of Oppenheimer and Groves, it was successful, producing a blast equivalent to 20,000 tons of TNT.
It was very important for the US government that the bomb project should be successful for changing reasons. Initially because they were afraid Germany might get a bomb first, so that became a fact. It was early on a factor in thinking about the war with Germany. Then secondly, when Germany was defeated and the bomb still wasn't quite ready, but nearly ready, of course the whole focus was on the war with Japan. And there the importance of the bomb was that it would help to bring the war to an end quickly.
When a second bomb was dropped on Nagasaki 3 days after the Hiroshima explosion, Japan immediately surrendered. The destructive power of this new weapon shocked the world, but served also to convince politicians that membership of the nuclear club would bring with it a world status few countries could hope to achieve. Britain had been very much the junior partner in the Manhattan Project, though its scientists had had access to some of the pool of American knowledge. The Soviet Union was aware of what had been going on at Los Alamos through a British spy, Klaus Fuchs. Though at diplomatic level, there was no more than the merest hint of the kind of weapon the United States planned to deploy.
The only thing that was done was that at the Potsdam meeting in July of 1945, after the bomb had been successfully tested in Alamogordo, Truman went up to Stalin after one of the formal sessions and remarked to him that we have a bomb of unusual destructive power. And Stalin apparently said nothing, just nodded his head, maybe said thank you, but in any event went back, talked to his people, and it was clear he understood that what Truman had in mind was the atomic bomb, because the Soviet Union had very good intelligence about the Manhattan Project.
I read Truman's book, and in November, went to Truman's home and museum, and there was a part in there, even in the book and in the museum, there's a part where they talk about him saying that very casually because he wanted to gauge the response he would get. And yeah, Stalin was pretty much just like, I hope you use it soon, something to that effect. And Truman later, the immediate reaction was, well, I didn't get out of that what I was expecting. So instantly it was like all the hair went up on his neck, and he was just like, he knows. What does he know? And yeah, I thought that was kind of really interesting. Truman really thought he was going to catch him off guard, but the response, I believe the response that Stalin gave him was, well, I hope to see it soon. Or I hope to see its blast soon, or something like that. Pretty much letting him know, yeah, I know about it.
Post-war Britain was in a much weaker state than it had been before 1939, though it...
That's an understatement. They were the only country going to war against the the Germans and doing. I mean, you know, France was trying, and there was a lot of other countries, but England was a holdout. Just props for that. It's an amazing feat, and I've said it before, I'll say it again. It should be talked about in terms of like a last stand, even though it wasn't a last stand, but you know, kind of like just the refusal. And it was the person in charge, Winston Churchill, was perfect, because he was not about to allow Germany to. I take that he wasn't going to allow Hitler. You know, Germany was involved, yes, but I will never. I'm not going to knock them for that. You know, but yeah.
It took 2 decades before the country began to come to terms with its new world position. It seemed entirely natural to pursue a nuclear policy, so scientists were set to work creating an independent nuclear weapon, a deterrent in the Cold War with the Soviets. The project had nothing like the money and resources available to the Americans, so an early decision had to be taken over which fissile material would form the heart of the British weapon. The Manhattan Project had hedged its bets by creating 2 production sites, each of which made a different core element. The task of Oak Ridge was to manufacture uranium-235, whilst Hanford created plutonium in its water-cooled graphite reactors. Neither technique was particularly easy, but there were advantages in following the plutonium route, and at first the British government set about looking for a site to house 2 water-cooled reactors, along the lines of those at Hanford. The Americans had realized very early on that such a design
Sorry, I don't want to see dancing. Back to the video.
early on that such a design carried inherent risks. If the coolant system failed, the pile would quickly become an atomic bomb. So their plant had been sited on a loop of the Columbia River to give easy access to the 25,000 gallons of water a minute needed to keep each reactor cool. But Hanford covered over 600 square miles, and there was nowhere in Britain suitable which met all of the requirements for such a design. So instead, the engineer in charge of production, Christopher Hinton, felt the only feasible solution was to build reactors cooled by air.
Christopher Hinton was extremely resistant to the idea that he should build water-cooled reactors in England because he knew that the reactors at Hanford were far from safe and that they had deliberately been built in a very, very remote site, and there was no site in England, remote or in Britain, sufficiently remote, in his opinion, to have a water-cooled reactor safely sited there.
So the decision was made.
Was his fear that the water would get contaminated and then it would affect the citizens? Because right off the bat, when I hear air-cooled, I mean, clearly, I understand now, but I think air-cooled and I think, oh, no. So I'm guessing it was a safety issue with the water. Or maybe I don't know.
To opt for air cooling, a system previously rejected by the Americans. The enhanced safety offered meant that a site much closer to inhabited areas could be used. And eventually, a former Royal Ordnance factory on the Cumbrian coast was chosen. But British scientists were at a disadvantage. Although they had been given access to many of the Manhattan Project's secrets, they hadn't been allowed near the plutonium-producing site at Hanford, and their knowledge of the process was sketchy. Furthermore, the McMahon Act of 1946 forbade American scientists from sharing nuclear secrets with any foreign national. But as time went on, there were informal meetings between British and American nuclear physicists, notably one in 1949 involving Edward Teller. He had worked with Enrico Fermi on the first ever nuclear pile at the University of Chicago. Teller, who went on to mastermind the hydrogen bomb, met with scientists from the Atomic Energy Authority at its Harwell headquarters.
There was a visit from 2 or 3 American scientists, Teller and Wigner. And Wigner, who was a Hungarian refugee scientist, very distinguished Hungarian scientist in USA, and who was obviously the discoverer of Wigner energy, he said that he thought that there was a danger of a fire in one of the British reactors, because he said that as a result of irradiation, you will get energy slowly building up in the graphite, and then unless you can find a way to release it, you are going to have an explosive situation.
But although the British scientists listened to the warnings from Teller and Wigner, they failed to pass them on to their colleagues at Risley, responsible for the design and construction of the Windscale piles. The energy state discovered by Wigner and pointed out to the British in 1949 would prove to be the cause of a fire in the No. 1 reactor 8 years later, when the graphite moderator collected a potential energy from the irradiation process. Wigner's prophetic warning suggested that the release of this energy, unless properly controlled, could lead to just such a conflagration.
Fission produces fast neutrons. The neutrons produce fission, but in the reactors they do it primarily not in their original fast state, but after they have been slowed down by many collisions with nuclei. These collisions with nuclei displace these nuclei. And in a graphite reactor, for instance, quite a number of the displaced carbon nuclei remain stuck in a state different from their lowest, from their equilibrium state. If then, at a later time, the whole reactor is heated to a somewhat higher temperature, then the nuclei from the somewhat higher energy position find back into their original lower position, and in doing so release the energy that they had contained. That in turn gives rise to an increase in temperature, which of course accelerates the process that I have already described. And so, Wigner said, reactors run at a relatively low temperature. If the temperature is increased, may undergo a process of instability, and this possibility should be taken into account in the design of the reactor.
Yeah.
Within a few months of the conversation about Wigner Energy, a visit to the Oak Ridge plant in Tennessee by the director of the Atomic Energy Authority, Lord Cockcroft, led to a decision which would have a far-reaching effect a decade later. During his trip, a release of radioactivity was found within the site, which was believed to have come from the chimneys of the Clinton reactor, a prototype air-cooled pile similar to the design adopted by the British at Windscale.
Okay.
The release worried Cockcroft, even though American scientists had already rejected a need for any filtration of the cooling air after it passed through their reactor. On his return to Britain, he insisted that the Windscale chimneys be fitted with filters to catch any radioactive particles and prevent their escape to the surrounding countryside.
That seems brilliant and should be like, it shouldn't even be a question that that's what you would need to do, just to let particles leak out. Like, no, doesn't feel safe at all.
It was a major engineering headache.
Well, you know.
By this time, construction work was well advanced, and the only place the filters could now be placed was in hurriedly designed galleries at the top of the 400-foot chimneys. Cockcroft's insistence caused much friction.
Construction was very difficult, building a filter gallery that high up, hauling all that amount of material up and doing the construction at that height. And then also, of course, maintaining the filters was very difficult because the big filter pads in the frames had to be regularly changed, and very often they were done in a howling gale above cloud level, and it was a horrendous job.
The first pile went critical towards the end of 1950, with the second following 8 months later. But by now the pressure on the Atomic Energy Authority to begin the production of plutonium was intense. Britain was being left behind in the arms race, and the timetable for the development of an atomic bomb laid down in the overall strategic plan of May 1947 had been overtaken by world events.
The Russians, I think, really surprised the West. They had got a crude atom bomb testable, and actually tested it in 1949. Most people seem to think that was 3 or 4 years ahead of when the Americans expected them to do it. The bigger surprise, though, was the development of the H-bomb, because while the United States had developed an H-bomb by about 1952 and tested a crude one, the Soviets came in only a year later. So in that sense, there was a lot of progress on the Soviet side. It took them years to deploy the finished systems, but at the testing level, they were pretty advanced.
With the Cold War growing in intensity, the British desire to move forward could only increase. Every effort was put into making the wind-scaled piles as efficient as possible to meet the deadline for a first atomic test in 1952. And although the production of plutonium reached its target on schedule, there were some worrying incidents in the behavior of the reactors that year.
We're going to stop it right there with some incidents. So this is part 1. It's going to be a 3-parter. If it's over 25 minutes, I break it down right away, and I'll say it again. The reason why I break it down is because the average length, like this is a 16-minute video plus my talking, let's call it 25 minutes. The average length of time people watch is like 11 to 15 minutes. So if I make them shorter, people can see more of them. And I already, I put out 10 of them a week, and it can take up some time to film, so if I can make them shorter, everyone's happy. So we're gonna end this here, and like and subscribe, and until part 2 drops, you have a good day, have a good night.